Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we are undertaking a deep dive into what is um, arguably the most ambitious planning document we've seen yet.
Absolutely.
This is from the KING-KAMBUF National Building Design Command Brief. It's the brief for Tuesday, December 9th, 2025, and it's focused on something that's not just physical, but deeply systemic.
And the title of the mission is, well, it's suitably grand. Transport and Logistics Corridor Networks Connecting KAMBUF City-States and Diaspora Hubs for Movement, Trade, and Freedom.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. And what's fascinating here is that the brief treats these networks not as simple engineering projects, not
Right.
just asphalt and steel.
Right.
It defines them immediately as the circulatory system of KAMBUF's sovereign economic and social life.
That metaphor, the circulatory system, I think that's crucial. It sets the entire tone. So the goal for our deep dive today, and really the mission for the designers, is massive.
It is.
We have to fully unpack this systemic challenge. How do you design corridors that enable high-efficiency trade, seamless mobility, regional integration, and this is the key part, freedom of movement across incredibly diverse African and diaspora geographies?
It forces a necessary perspective shift, doesn't it? We're not just looking at building a specific bridge or paving a single highway.
Not at all.
The intent laid out is crystal clear. These corridors have to be designed as integrated policy frameworks.
What does that mean in practice, an integrated policy framework?
Well, it means combining the physical infrastructure, the steel, the asphalt, the fiber optic cables, with what you might call the soft infrastructure.
The invisible stuff.
Exactly. The regulatory systems, the financing mechanisms, the institutional governance you need to make say, a 1,300-kilometer rail line actually function across multiple sovereign borders.
And that's the high-level vision, which we're going to explore across 10 very distinct schemes. But we also have a crucial, necessary reality check.
Right. The case study.
The case study. We have a real-world, high-stakes situation involving one of these very schemes, the Lobito Corridor, that just highlights this often tragic conflict between visionary, multi-billion-dollar development and the fundamental, messy requirements of social justice on the ground.
It's the theory meeting a very harsh reality.
Exactly. So let's start at the absolute foundation. The brief labels this the Rotating Master Challenge focus, urban systems and policy. Now, when you see that focus, you know they're demanding systemic integration. This means success isn't defined by, how fast you can build something. It's defined by the sustainability of the entire system.
And that systemic focus, it's a direct critique of historical development, isn't it?
How so?
For too long, infrastructure projects across the continent were planned in silos. A road was built by the Ministry of Public Works, but the necessary customs agreements or, the land zoning changes required to maximize its economic impact.
They were never coordinated.
Never. They were never coordinated by the Ministry of Trade or Land Affairs, so you'd get this beautiful new road that led to a border crossing that took 3 days to get through.
Which defeats the entire purpose. And the challenge here is explicitly framed. You have to design corridors as integrated frameworks. They have to function as policy engines.
Right, so a project is not considered complete if the structure is finished, but the necessary regulatory or financing laws aren't in place.
This is literally nation building through infrastructure.
To illustrate the complexity for you, let's just look at the 6 pillars. The brief mandates must be fully integrated.
Okay.
First, you need the physical transport asset. That's the obvious one. But that asset must be married to sustainable land use planning.
So you can't just build a railway through a field without deciding what that field is going to be in 20 years.
Precisely. Then, that land use plan dictates the potential for economic corridors, the specific industries or trade hubs that will actually use the route.
Okay, that makes sense.
But all of this relies on harmonized regulatory frameworks across different jurisdictions.
The paperwork, the laws.
The boring but essential stuff. Then it has to be supported by reliable financing and finally governed by robust institutional governance. All 6 have to work together.
That level of integration sounds incredibly fragile, especially across multiple states. If any one of those 6 pillars fails, the entire multi-billion-dollar investment risks becoming a white elephant.
Or worse, a stranded asset. Exactly. Imagine designing a modern heavy-haul rail line, transport that can handle 20-ton axle loads.
State of the art.
Right. But the regulatory framework fails to mandate standard gauge track or compatible rolling stock across the two countries it spans. The trains literally can't cross the border.
The complete failure.
Or if the institutional governance body collapses after 5 years, who ensures the maintenance funds are collected and spent? The integrated framework is basically the insurance policy against all those historical failures.
Let's address the elephant in the room here. The justification. The massive outlay of capital and, frankly, political will. The sources confirm the obvious. The continent faces a huge infrastructure financing gap.
Huge. We're talking a deficit measured in the hundreds of billions of dollars. This isn't just about building for luxury. It's about a fundamental, urgent need for commerce and connectivity.
And it's not just an internal priority, is it? There's external validation for this.
Oh, absolutely. The brief references the recent strategic push by institutions like the African Development Bank, the AFDB.
Okay.
They've made trade corridors and logistics networks central to their entire strategy for Africa's prosperity and integration. They see this as the definitive path toward economic sovereignty.
It's a consensus then. If you can't move your own goods efficiently, transparently, and affordably, you can't control your own economy.
That's the bottom line.
So when these corridors are done correctly, what is the expected tangible impact? We're talking about more than just speeding up container ships, right?
We're talking about profound socioeconomic transformation. The primary measurable impact is a dramatic lowering of transport costs, which right now can be 20, even 50% higher in Africa than in other regions.
And lower costs.
Lower costs enable competitive value chains. This, in turn, integrates fragmented regional economies. And maybe most importantly, it improves livelihoods across urban and rural divisions.
Give me an example of that.
Think of smallholder farmers in the interior. Right now, a huge portion of their harvest might spoil before it ever gets to a market or a port. A well-designed corridor with, say, cold storage facilities along the route gives them guaranteed access to the coast. It changes everything.
That leads us directly to the design methodology itself.
Yeah.
For anyone listening who manages complex projects, the level of detail and the rigor demanded in this brief is breathtaking.
It is.
It outlines 4 very specific, time-bound action steps for the design teams. This is not some leisurely academic exercise.
No, this is highly pressure-cooked. Step 1 is simple enough. Project selection. They have to choose either a short study that's about 60 to 90 minutes, often an urban system like a bus rapid transit line,
Okay.
or a long commission-style project. That's 2 to 3 hours. And that's where you get into the massive transnational corridors. This choice forces an immediate commitment of resources and focus.
Then comes step 2, the 90-minute concept block. And this is where I start wondering if the brief is demanding genius or just filtering out incompetence.
Yeah.
How can you define the entire policy framework for a transcontinental line in just 90 minutes?
Well, it's not about finalizing every single detail. It's about establishing the framework and doing it quickly.
So a high-level sketch.
A very detailed sketch. In those 90 minutes, they have to sketch the physical alignment, annotate all the various flows, freight, passenger, trade, and data, and crucially, define that policy and governance frame.
They have to answer questions like
Who collects the tolls? Which country's police force polices the train in the border zone? What dispute resolution mechanism is in place for cross-border land claims? It forces instant clarity on the really hard systemic challenges.
following that, step 3, another 90-minute drawing and detail block.
Right. So you move from the big picture concept to practical engineering. This requires producing plans and cross-sections, detailing structural elements like rail beds, terminals, and annotating systems like capacity and throughput.
But the brief also mandates something else here, something I found really interesting. They have to annotate social and environmental metrics directly on the drawings.
And this is where the ethical mandate becomes a physical reality on the page. They have to include the displacement risk index right there on the drawing. They have to detail the social mitigation zones.
So the drawing itself has to reflect the political priorities, not just the engineering capabilities.
Exactly. It's an enforced commitment to looking at the human cost right alongside the material cost. You can't ignore it if it's right there in blue and white.
And step 4 ties it all together. The public communication piece. The design team has to draft outlines for white papers or vision presentations that link the technical specifications directly to the highest ideals. KING-KAMBUF sovereignty, economic integration, and social justice. The design must tell an immediate political and social story.
In short, if the designer can't explain how their multimodal hub reduces post-harvest losses and guarantees compensation for displaced residents, they have failed the brief.
Regardless of how straight the railway track is.
Precisely.
So now we move into the specifics.
Mhm.
And the ambition here just explodes across the continent. We have 10 distinct schemes, and I think we can group them thematically to really understand the strategic thrust of this KING-KAMBUF vision.
Right. Our first grouping, Theme A, focuses on the heavy lifters: extractive, trade, and regional spines. These are schemes 1, 2, 4, and 5. They're all about raw materials, bulk trade, and connecting the economic powerhouses.
Let's start with Scheme 1, because it's the big one and it comes back later. The West Central Africa, Lobito Corridor.
This is a massive project. It's linking the mineral wealth of the DRC's copper belt, stretching about 1,300 kilometers, all the way through Angola's central highlands to the Atlantic port of Lobito. It's a multi-billion-dollar cross-border rail and logistics corridor.
And the core challenge for the designers, it's profound. You're transforming this railway, which was fundamentally colonial extractive infrastructure.
Right, built for one purpose.
Haul resources out
Yeah.
with minimal value add for the local population. And the challenge is to turn that into a modern, multi-purpose corridor.
It can't just serve mineral export anymore. It has to simultaneously support regional trade, agricultural export, and passenger mobility for local populations. It demands flipping that entire historical script.
And the required deliverables here, they force that transformation. They need a concept corridor map, sure, but then they jump immediately to two scales that really matter.
The engineering view and the human view.
Exactly. A detailed section of a standard segment at 1.50,000 down to 1.5,000, that's the engineering.
But here's the key insight, I think. They also demand a detailed drawing of the intermodal freight yard plus the community access zone at 1.500 scale.
Why is that 1.500 scale so important?
Because it's tight enough to show the curb cuts, the pedestrian paths, the placement of market stalls, the security fence line. It forces the designer to see the human interface, the difference between a massive faceless rail terminal and a neighborhood access point that people actually use.
That is a phenomenal planning constraint. It forces the designer out of that 30,000-foot abstract view and into the immediate lived reality of the project.
It does. And the implementation angle is, as you'd expect, incredibly complex. You need a cross-national agreement between the DRC and Angola, and you're leveraging blended finance.
Which is using public or philanthropic funds to de-risk and attract commercial private investment.
Exactly. All through a consortium model.
And as we're going to see in Part 3, the brief's warning here is almost prophetic.
It is. The cautionary precedent section states that corridors designed only for export often reproduce inequalities and risk displacing populations. The danger is built right into the source material.
Let's move to Scheme 5, the Southern Africa. Transnational Rail Corridor. This one is about linking landlocked countries, maybe South Africa, Zimbabwe, Botswana, to deepwater ports, like the proposed Ponta Tecobinene link.
The primary struggle here is just pure institutional governance complexity across multiple borders.
It's a bureaucratic nightmare.
It can be. They need to manage multimodal linkages, from rail to road to pipeline, and plan for maintenance, security, and socioeconomic inclusion. The brief actually demands specific ESG notes.
Environmental, social, and governance metrics.
Right. They have to detail the cross-border connectivity index, the environmental impact, and critically, a dedicated multi-jurisdictional maintenance funding plan.
Why the intense focus on the maintenance funding plan? That seems like a small detail in a multi-billion-dollar project.
Because the cautionary precedent for this region shows that historic rail projects stall not in the building phase, but in the long-term operational phase. It's because of funding shortfalls and political disagreement over who pays for upkeep. The track might be built, but if the signal systems fail and customs takes 5 days to clear a train, the entire economic benefit just vanishes.
So the brief demands a governance structure that guarantees maintenance trusts are funded and enforced from day one.
It has to be non-negotiable.
Let's shift to food security with schemes 2 and 4. These are the agricultural and coastal inland trade corridors in East and West Africa. The shared goal is overcoming fragmented infrastructure to link coastal ports directly to rich inland agricultural zones.
And this moves infrastructure design firmly into the realm of supply chain management. The crucial detail is the integration of multimodal transport, logistics, and specifically cold chain infrastructure.
So refrigerated transport and storage.
Yes. Scheme 2 focuses on East Africa, where high post-harvest losses are a severe economic and nutritional drain. The designers have to place cold chain depots along the route to reduce spoilage.
And Scheme 4 in West Africa emphasizes enabling agro-industry. So it's not just about getting raw produce to market.
No, it's about creating systems where farmers can move from selling raw tomatoes to selling, say, tomato paste, processed or semi-processed goods, which reduces dependence on imports and captures more value locally.
And the key ESG focus here is very specific, very quantified.
Highly quantified. Measurable reduction in post-harvest losses, direct creation of rural employment, and improved trade equity metrics. This is essential because the caution with these corridors is that if you just build a road,
It only helps the big guys.
it tends to marginalize rural producers and benefit only the large commercial traders. The design has to include physical space planning prompts, like designated depot areas for community cooperatives, to ensure everyone has access.
So if Theme A was about heavy resource and trade movement, Theme B, covering Schemes 3, 6, and 8, is fundamentally about moving people and products against the clock and the climate. It's all about speed, efficiency, and environmental resilience.
Right. And Scheme 3 tackles the nightmare scenario of rapid, unregulated urbanization, the sub-Saharan metropolis.
The endless sprawl.
Exactly. The focus is on implementing high-capacity urban BRT bus, rapid transit, and mass transit systems. It's a pragmatic, cost-effective way to fight congestion and air pollution.
The core challenge here goes beyond just reducing commute times, though. The brief says it's to strategically avoid informal settlement sprawl by anchoring transit and land use. They mention transit-oriented development, or TOD zones. For the listener, what exactly does TOD entail here?
TOD is the idea that you design compact, walkable, mixed-use communities right around your transit stops. So if you build a new BRT line, the land near the stations becomes instantly valuable. If you don't control the zoning, you get speculation, displacement, and eventually just more generic, car-dependent sprawl. TOD mandates that the new development is high-density housing, office space, and retail, all right next to the transit line. It maximizes ridership and minimizes car use.
And the financing mechanism for this is particularly innovative. It mentions value capture financing. Can you break that down for us?
Absolutely. Value capture means the government captures a portion of the increased land value that was created by the new transit line to help pay for the line itself.
So the project pays for itself in a way.
In a way, yes. If a piece of land was worth, say, $10,000 before the BRT station was announced, and it's worth $100,000 after, the municipal government might collect a special assessment or tax on that $90,000 increase in value. The implementation here relies on municipal bonds and bank loans, all leveraged by that future increase.
But the caution is a huge urban planning trap, a classic one.
It is. If the BRT only serves the newly developed expensive TOD zones, it can actually worsen spatial inequity.
It prices out the urban poor.
Exactly. It pushes informal settlements even further to the periphery where services are non-existent. So the design has to mandate affordable housing components within those TOD zones. It has to be equitable.
Okay, Scheme 6 takes us to the extreme. The North Africa to Sub-Saharan Freight Corridor, a true desert crossing project.
This is a massive logistical feat straight across the Sahara.
And the core challenge here is just survival against an extreme climate. We're talking sandstorms, 50 degrees Celsius heat, profound water scarcity. It's not just a road, it has to be an autonomous ecosystem.
That's a great way to put it. The design solution demands integrated logistic nodes and solar-powered electrified rest and logistics stations.
So every few hundred kilometers you have an oasis, basically.
A high-tech oasis. It requires desert-resilient road and rail engineering using specialized materials, maybe elevated sections to manage sand dunes, and self-sufficient renewable energy microgrids. These microgrids have to sustain everything. Cooling for freight, housing for transport workers, even water purification. The ESG focus shifts entirely to energy self-sufficiency and water use efficiency.
And Scheme 8, the North African Corridor? This one links the Mediterranean coast to inland economies, closer to the Sahara's edge. It's less about a pure desert crossing and more about coastal integration.
Right. The focus is on linking those vital coastal trade spines to inland economies while managing more generalized climate risks like creeping desertification and localized heat waves. And the critical design mandate here is integrating the small towns.
How so?
Often, a major new highway will bypass smaller, struggling towns just to save 5 minutes of travel time.
Which effectively kills those small towns economically.
Precisely. The deliverables here require detailing how the logistic nodes are designed to interface with and revive the community. You have to create small town service centers, mandated community markets. The infrastructure must be an engine for decentralization, not just an expressway for bypass.
And that brings us to the third and I think most visionary theme, Theme C, digital and diaspora integration. These schemes 9, 7, and 10 recognize that modern logistics requires digital architecture just as much as it requires physical steel.
This is the forward-looking part of the brief. Scheme 9 is the All-Africa Digital Logistics Corridor. This is the integration of a physical freight rail or road with a robust digital backbone.
So, fiber optic cables running alongside the railway tracks.
Exactly, along with associated data hubs spanning contiguous regions.
The core challenge is merging that physical transport layer with the digital infrastructure to enable efficient, transparent, and this word is highlighted, absolutely sovereign supply chains. What do sovereign supply chains mean in this context?
It means control over the data that is generated by the flow of goods. Every time a container moves, it generates data customs, clearance, tracking, pricing, origin, destination.
A huge amount of data.
A treasure trove. If that data is processed and stored by external non-African entities, those entities gain actionable intelligence that can be used to control or influence African markets.
I see.
A sovereign supply chain means the infrastructure for data generation and analysis is located within the KING-KAMBUF aligned states. It ensures transparency and economic autonomy. You control your own data.
The deliverables here include a systems diagram showing both the physical and the digital layers working in parallel. But the caution is powerful. Integrated corridors risk data colonialism.
This is a massive, massive risk. If governance and data privacy are not explicitly prioritized from the outset, this digital layer could simply mean that African trade data is ultimately controlled, analyzed, and leveraged by external trade giants or non-African state entities for their own geopolitical or economic gain.
So the brief explicitly demands data governance protocols be drawn up right alongside the cable roads.
They have to be.
Finally, Schemes 7 and 10 bridge the gap to the global community, focusing on diaspora trade and return corridors. Scheme 10 is the global logistics transport link, connecting diaspora ports in places like the Americas or Europe with African ports and inland corridors.
The purpose is not just to facilitate generic trade, it's to structurally support diaspora-led investment, the movement of remittance-based goods, cultural exchange.
It's formalizing those informal networks that already exist.
Exactly. And the network must be designed to prevent exploitation and guarantee benefit for local African communities, which is what Scheme 7 is about. It recognizes the diaspora's financial power as a strategic asset.
So how do you actually fund multi-continental infrastructure using individual financial flows? It mentions diaspora bonds. How do those work?
Diaspora bonds are a specific, targeted financing tool. Instead of African governments seeking loans from, say, the World Bank or foreign states, they issue bonds, debt securities that are exclusively sold to their diaspora populations abroad.
So you're tapping into patriotism, essentially.
And smart economics. It's an attempt to turn the enormous steady flow of remittances, which are often used only for consumption, into long-term stable infrastructure investment. The implementation angle leverages not just these bonds, but also social impact investors and remittance-linked investment mechanisms.
That shifts the funding model entirely from external debt to internal global solidarity capital. It's a powerful idea.
It is. The required deliverable here is ambitious. A global network diagram showing diaspora hubs, maritime routes, African port entries, and the subsequent logistics nodes. You're literally mapping a new sovereign economic relationship.
But the caution, as always, is that diaspora-driven corridors, while internally funded, still risk being shaped by external demand. If the governance fails to enforce local hiring and community benefit rules,
then the infrastructure could still end up serving primarily the interests of the diaspora investors rather than the local populations living alongside the new roads or ports.
So every single scheme, whether it's rail, road, digital, or diaspora link, it all circles back to that core mandate.
Build writs of justice.
We have meticulously detailed the visionary, the aspirational side of this brief. We've emphasized social justice and integrated planning in theory. But now we have to turn to the immediate harsh reality check. We have to revisit Scheme 1.
Lobito Corridor.
The Lobito Corridor. Because the multi-billion-dollar promises are already colliding with profound human costs on the ground.
Let's cement the geopolitics first, just to be clear. The Lobito Corridor is this massive effort to rehabilitate the colonial-era Benguela Railway. It links the mineral-rich Katanga province of the DRC to the Angolan coast.
And its purpose is global.
Absolutely global. It's to facilitate the export of critical minerals, copper and cobalt, which are essential for the global green energy transition, specifically for electric car batteries. This is high stakes, heavily funded by Western pledges, including a $553 million loan from the U.S. and substantial EU funding for related links.
But that positive vision of sovereign trade and green energy supply chains is being fundamentally destabilized by a humanitarian crisis on the ground.
It is?
A recent report by the campaign group Global Witness outlines the conflict, and it directly undermines that social justice mandate of the KING-KAMBUF brief.
The core issue is mass displacement risk, and the data is deeply, deeply troubling. Global Witness warns that up to 6,500 people are at risk of losing their homes and businesses in the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
6,500 people.
It's a real human consequence of an infrastructure upgrade.
Where specifically is this happening, and what is the physical impact we're talking about?
The threat is concentrated in the Congolese mining city of Kolwezi, particularly along the stretch of railway line that runs to the Angolan border. The report identifies up to 1,200 physical buildings, homes, small shops, businesses that are facing demolition.
You mentioned earlier that the original railway was largely defunct since the 1980s. That's the real crux of this land tenure debate, isn't it? Why did people settle there if it was state land?
They settled because the land was effectively derelict for decades. The official railway buffer zone, the area where no construction is allowed, was rarely, if ever, enforced.
So the state wasn't policing its own land.
Not at all. So residents, many of whom are poorer, built homes and livelihoods, particularly in neighborhoods like Bel Air and Kolwezi. Some residents even claim to have purchased plots from vendors who may have falsely represented ownership, or even from state railway employees who had allegedly illegally allocated the land. It's a very murky situation.
So when the rehabilitation project began, the conflict centered on defining that buffer zone, the distance required on either side of the track for safe operations. What's the current disagreement?
It's a conflict between the current reality and the planned future. For the initial emergency works, the required buffer is often cited as 10 meters.
Okay.
However, Congolese officials and workers for the DRC State Railway Company, SNCC, they informed Global Witness that for the full, proper rehabilitation, the planned future buffer zone would be 25 meters on either side of the track.
Yeah, and it's that larger 25-meter mandate.
That's what generates the catastrophic estimate of 6,500 people potentially displaced.
And the official provincial response, according to the report, was chilling.
It was.
The provincial land affairs minister called people living inside this larger buffer zone illegals.
Which is legally convenient, but ethically, well, it's questionable at best. Local nonprofit organizations are rightly pushing back. They're arguing that you cannot simply label residents who are left to live there for 10, 20, 30 years as illegal squatters overnight.
Especially when the state itself failed to enforce its own boundaries for half a century.
Exactly.
And the fear among the residents is completely justified. They aren't speculating in the abstract.
No, they have precedent.
They cite previous instances of demolitions for new roads and mines in the Kolwezi area where no payment or adequate compensation was ever provided. This history of forced eviction without due process is fueling the resistance.
And this is where the accountability mechanism of these multinational megaprojects just breaks down. We need to look at the institutional responses because they reveal a clear pattern of risk insulation and, frankly, buck passing.
Okay, let's start with the concession holder. The Lobito Atlantic Railway, or LAR, it's a consortium including Trafigura and Moda Engel. They won the 30-year concession for the Angolan section. What's their position on the DRC displacement?
LAR is executing the classic insulation strategy. They state they are only providing financing for the existing railway in the DRC in exchange for the right to use it.
So they're just a bank, essentially.
That's the claim. They explicitly stress that the DRC State Railway Company, SNCC, retains full responsibility for maintenance and operation within the DRC. And critically, LAR claims they are not aware of and has not been presented with any evidence to support the claim that 6,500 people could be displaced.
They're pleading ignorance.
Total plausible deniability. They are distancing themselves from the social fallout.
It's a perfect demonstration of how international financing can separate itself from the consequences of construction. What about the Western funders, the U.S. and the EU, whose money is enabling this whole project?
Well, both are emphasizing that they apply the highest social and environmental standards. The EU Commission spokesperson confirmed the project is still at an early stage and insists it will apply standards including thorough consultation and, where needed, a formal resettlement action plan for fair compensation.
But there's always a but.
The critical nuance is that the EU spokesperson also clarified that the EU is not involved in the rehabilitation works currently being carried out by SNCC or the LAR consortium.
So the displacement is happening now.
Exactly. This is the implementation gap. The risk is occurring now during the initial, less scrutinized rehabilitation phase led by the local state entity, SNCC, which may be relying on outdated or colonial-era land use definitions.
And the international financiers, with their high standards and resettlement plans, they're waiting for detailed feasibility studies to be completed before they officially get involved in the deeper, capital-intensive rehabilitation.
The social crisis happens before the ethical oversight kicks in.
This Lobito story, it's just a perfect, devastating counterpoint to the entire KING-KAMBUF brief. The brief warned explicitly that corridors designed only for export and extraction often reproduce inequalities and risk displacing populations.
And that is precisely why the theoretical requirements of the KING-KAMBUF brief are so ambitious and so necessary. The brief attempts to design a framework that prevents the Kolwezi scenario.
By forcing those ESG notes.
By mandating specific ESG notes on displacement risk and resettlement plan and a community integration index as non-negotiable deliverables. The brief is a constant, necessary ethical check against the powerful economic and geopolitical forces that prioritize speed and extraction over human dignity.
It mandates that you cannot separate the engineering from the moral architecture.
You can't, or at least you shouldn't.
This intense tension, this gap between the high aspiration in the design room and the brutal reality on the ground, it brings us back to the final necessary complexity of the work itself. The required deliverables we talked about, concept maps, detailed sections, communication outlines, they're immense.
And the successful implementation of any of these 10 schemes relies on institutional innovation. We have to synthesize the necessary implementation angles across all of them, and that means they require complex, layered agreements.
Cross-national agreements for rail.
Multinational agreements for digital infrastructure.
And even municipal-level agreements for those urban TOD zones.
And then there's the financing. A dizzying array of financing models. You're blending institutional funding from development finance institutions, or DFIs, with private investors, securing export credit facilities, tapping into dedicated green funds.
And utilizing those crucial diaspora bonds and remittance-linked investment mechanisms. It's a complete mosaic of capital.
We also noted the explicit focus on specific project delivery methods. The brief mandates the use of modular depot and station design, which speeds up construction and allows for easier replication. And it emphasizes local contracting and the establishment of long-term self-sustaining maintenance trusts.
It's about building systems that are resilient to political change and that build local capacity.
Right. But ultimately, all of this technical complexity is driven by an underlying philosophy. It's one that aims to reverse centuries of infrastructure built purely for external extractive purposes.
Let's conclude by examining the KING-KAMBUF closing directive. This really defines the philosophical foundation of the entire national initiative.
These final instructions, provided in the brief, they serve as a manifesto. They set the ethical standard for every meter of rail and asphalt. They begin with the core mandate. Build not just roads, build routes of justice.
That just sets the bar incredibly high. It means every single design decision has to be weighed against its ethical impact. And they further elaborate on the function of this infrastructure. Lay iron and asphalt that carry food, knowledge, commerce, dignity.
This is the anti-extractive philosophy in its clearest form. It demands that the infrastructure serve multi-purpose functions that elevate human capital.
Carrying agricultural goods before they spoil.
Connecting universities to research centers.
And ensuring dignified movement, not just extracting raw resources for external consumption.
Then they emphasize global and regional integration. Link village to port, suburb to city-state, continent to diaspora. It rejects the historical fragmentation that has stunted intra-African trade and emphasizes universal connectivity across all geographic divisions.
And the ultimate metaphor reinforces the urgency and the vitality of this mission. Corridors are the veins of a living nation.
It's a powerful image. This vision reinforces the idea that the network is a fundamental organic necessity for national survival and economic health. You cannot thrive without a robust, well-circulated system.
The directive concludes with the mandate for execution. It encapsulates the entire philosophy into 3 simple, powerful phrases. Design with clarity, govern with equity, build for a legacy.
And that acknowledges that the long-term success of these mega-projects rests just as much on the quality of the governance structures and the equity frameworks as it does on the quality of the engineering itself. So we've taken a journey today. From the purely visionary, those 10 integrated policy and physical schemes connecting coast, inland, desert, and the diaspora, right through to the critical, heart-wrenching reality check we saw in the Lobito Corridor case study.
What stands out, and what you, the listener, must contemplate, is the immense tension that is inherent in these mega projects. The KING-KAMBUF brief attempts to design away the worst risks. It mandates resettlement plans and community integration indexes.
But the reality in Kolwezi shows us that the moment global critical mineral demands meet existing, complex land tenure systems and weak governance, the best-laid plans are tested.
And often, they tragically fail.
The challenge is enormous. Infrastructure is absolutely essential for economic sovereignty and integration, but can it truly be built for justice and equity when global geopolitical demands and local land tenure complexities collide so violently?
Is this problem solvable purely through design mandates? Is it truly possible to design away the displacement risk? Or is the visionary design brief itself a constant, necessary, and ultimately aspirational check against the messy, often brutal reality of implementing change on this scale? A check that constantly reminds the builders that the deepest foundation is not the rail bed, but the moral architecture of the system itself. That's what you need to keep mulling over as these massive projects roll forward.